Okay, I believe I'm recording now. I hope I am. All right. Well, Happy New Year and welcome everyone to the Hawaii Aquaculture Tech and Research Brown Bag, sponsored by NELHA and the Hawaii Aquaculture Collaborative, which is facilitated by the University of Hawaii Sea Grant College Program. I'm Jean Schneider, representing the Sea Grant team, and Ray Nguyen is our co-host at NELHA. The recording and slides. Oops, sorry, is someone? Okay, let's see if you can mute unless you'd like to speak. Unmute now. Okay, great. The recording and slides of today's session will be archived on the actions page of our website, hiaquacollab.org, where you will find previous sessions and many other resources. A few announcements. Coming up next Thursday on January 18th, Senator Lorraine Inouye, chair of the Water and Land Committee, is hosting an aquaculture informational briefing at the state capitol, and it will also be streamed live on the Senate YouTube channel. We hope that you will attend to show your support of Hawaii aquaculture. Funding opportunities. If you are a producer and plan to apply for Sea Grant funding, please submit your letter of intent by January 17th. Also, the annual Hawaii Grant in Aid program is accepting applications with a deadline of January 19th. And we got a press release today that the Department of Ag has funds available for food systems infrastructure. That application is due by February 19th. Also, if you are a producer, please respond to the USDA Census of Aquaculture by January 15th, and our colleagues at ASU are seeking respondents to their Hawaii Aquaculture Producer Survey. Links to these opportunities are on the homepage of our website, hiaquacollab.org, but we don't have a link to the HDOA infrastructure program yet, so we'll keep looking for that. And next month, we'll hear from USDA about loans and funding available for aquaculture. All right, let me continue to admit people here. Here we go. And okay, now let's get to the fun stuff. So this is why we're here today. We'd like to welcome Dave Anderson, the Science Officer and Production Manager at Kauai Sea Farm. We are actually welcoming him back to our sessions. Dave was our first ever brown bag speaker back in July of 2022, where he discussed raising clams in Nomilu Fish Pond. He's returned today to provide an update and to discuss efforts to restore the pond through production of various products. So welcome, Dave.
Well, thank you, Jean. Aloha kako, and thank you all for joining. I got involved with this project about 4 years ago when two people from the family that have held title to this land for about 100 years approached me at my former job and asked me to quit and come help them start an oyster farm as an alternative to selling the property. So I thought it was a very exciting and challenging proposition. The project has evolved quite a bit since then. We're still focusing on using a very productive and production-focused strategy towards the restoration and maintenance of the fish pond, but we've also established now a research program as well as a restoration program for the pond overall. So I think most people here are pretty familiar with fish ponds, so I'm not going to go too deep into this history, but just a couple of points to make. So pre-1800s, fish ponds are part of the Ahupua'a system, which was really a land use management system in Hawaii that focused almost entirely on prioritizing food production on every bit of land that you could produce food on. And this was the only way that the Hawaiian Kingdom could support the population that it had back then. Throughout the 1800s, and you have the introduction of privatized land and the dispossession of land from Hawaiian people. Most of this land was converted into monocrop production for sugarcane and pineapple, and lots of immigrants came in to work these fields. Fish ponds during this period in the early 1900s were in a mostly productive state, but most of them were then being managed by the immigrant community. And this was also sort of a strategy of landowners to continue the dispossession of land from Hawaiian people. And I think it's important just to acknowledge this period in time and point out that, like, when we're talking about fish pond production and prioritizing production in the restorative model of fish ponds, we're not talking about striving to return to this state. We're really trying to come up with solutions and opportunities for fish ponds in the modern restoration framework that will fit with the current goals. And that's today we have fish ponds throughout the state of Hawaii being restored. Lots of it's grant funded, philanthropic donation funded, and we're really trying to come up with strategies and opportunities to increase production, sort of in ways that you might not immediately think of, but that will also benefit the ponds themselves. So in the period of the fish ponds not really operating, there was a massive amount of nutrients that really settled in the bottom. This can kind of hamper the traditional extensive production of fish coming into the ponds. So most of our products that we focus on now, our two main products are clams and ogo. And so these are low trophic species that we're really trying to turn that nutrients into a resource to help out the fish pond in removing the nutrients and also creating these really delicious, high value and high demand products. Over the past 4 years of increasing the water flow through the Alwai Channel, removing all the mangrove that had been encroaching into the pond, and growing all of these low trophic species, we've really seen a shift in the population of fish. From 4 years ago, it was almost entirely tilapia in the pond, and now we have the primaries that's mostly native fish in the pond now. The tilapia population is really much lower, and we're seeing a lot of native fish coming in. And so we are now harvesting these fish as well, and selling them to different markets, a lot of ava and the predatory papio and barracuda primarily. So the clams that we're growing in the fish pond are non-native species that were introduced back in the 60s, and they really took off and were thriving from the 60s up until shortly after Hurricane Iniki in the early 90s. The hurricane closed off the channels to the ocean and basically killed all the clams in the pond. So to continue our production, we had to establish a hatchery for the clams. So we have a solar-powered off-grid hatchery that allows us to continue our clam production. And this hatchery is also now being used for some research programs to look into production of other native species or native species that could have restorative benefits for the water in the pond, and also that are high value and have high demand, both locally and in export markets. So the first big research project that we've taken on is looking into sea cucumber aquaculture. Sea cucumbers are detritivores, so they eat all of the waste in the bottom of the ponds or in the bottom of the ocean. If they're out there, they're considered a keystone species in helping sort of cycle the nutrients through the ecosystem. They've been consumed in Asian countries for thousands of years. They were also consumed in ancient Hawaii as well, which we don't know as much of, but there is record that that was ongoing. But over the last 30 years, the demand in Asian countries has really skyrocketed. So the wild-caught fisheries have kind of plateaued over the past 20 years, and aquaculture has really exploded. So now aquaculture accounts for about 80% of total worldwide production. The U.S. does not account for any of this production, but the U.S. produces about 1,000 metric tons of wild-caught sea cucumber per year. But even that number is dwarfed just by the amount of sea cucumbers that are actually imported into the U.S. And these imports almost entirely come from Mexico and are almost certainly just stopping in the U.S. on their way to the these other export destinations. There's some photos in the middle of the slide here that I want to share. These are some I took from Chinatown in Philadelphia on a trip a couple months ago, just to show you that even in the US, the prices that people are paying for sea cucumber. The one in the middle at about $370 a pound, that's a species that is extremely closely related to one of the animals that we have here, the native species in Hawaii that we're now targeting most of our project efforts towards. And this is the dried price, but it would equate to about $37 a pound wet weight, which is still a pretty good price for a product, an animal that grows eating, mud and poop off the bottom of a fish pond. So far, our progress, we've identified the species of sea cucumber in Hawaii that are definitely the most desirable and the best ones to target. We found ways to grow them in the fish pond that are working out pretty successfully. We've got high survival, good growth. And you can actually see they're like little vacuum cleaners. You can actually see the trails as they go across the bottom of the pond in the sand. Where we're having the challenges for the project is in the hatchery. Initially, we were having a lot of challenges with the seasonal maturation or lack of maturation. We believe that we've pretty much overcome this. We've gotten to the point of regular spawning. And now we are having some issues in the larval stages. We have about 7 to 10 days of good, healthy larval development. And then we start to see the gut of the larvae shrink. And over the next 3 or 4 days, we see the whole animal shrink, and the larval shape turns kind of round, and then they just sort of dissipate into nothing. We found some accounts from Japanese sea cucumber hatcheries where that's related to a Vibrio-specific gut wasting disease, and we think that is probably the culprit. So now we're integrating ozone into our water filtration as well as probiotics and trying to overcome that. And we're actually hoping to spawn in the next couple of days to get another shot at it. If anyone out here wants to share stories and experiences working with Vibrio and hatcheries and ozone to overcome it, I would certainly be happy to talk. Some upcoming projects that we have this year that we've received some funding for are these native oysters that we don't actually know what species they are, but they have made their way into the fish pond themselves. And then last winter, they started spawning within the pond on their own. So our clam production equipment would just get covered with thousands of oyster spat. That gave us a really good idea of how old they were because we knew when that equipment went into the pond. And so obviously the oysters weren't on the equipment before it went into the pond. So the oysters here on the left are about 7 months old. And so they're smaller than Pacific oysters would be at that size, but we do think that that's still a growth rate that could be potentially commercially viable. So we're very excited to work with these species, and actually just at the start of this received a text message that it sounds like we just had our first spawn of them. So starting today, we'll actually have the first larvae in the hatchery of this species. We also have some funding to start checking out working with opie shrimp. The Nomila fish pond, like most fish ponds, is loaded with opie. My background is largely from shrimp before this project. And these shrimp, they carry their eggs, they're buried on the outside. So if it were efficient to mass produce these in the hatchery easily, our main goal in producing them is to replace tilapia in our brown water tanks, which we use as feed for our clam nursery and then also for our clam broodstock to get them ready to spawn. So if we could replace the tilapia with opie, we would be happy. The chefs that we sell to would be very happy. They really want to buy it from us. But then also, if you could do that and produce them in large amounts efficiently, it could really be a great food source for fish as well. And so big thank you to PackRack at Hilo, and we just received our first shipment of moi from them. So right now we've got moi fingerlings that are growing in a tank, and they're going to grow a little bit larger and then go out into a cage that we have set up in the fish pond. So we're also kind of thinking with the moi with the opie, that if we could grow them enough where the opie could be a supplemental feed for moi in the pond, it would reduce the need for feed input and feed costs, but then also it would probably make just exceptionally delicious fish. So just to touch back, as Gene said, I gave a talk to on one of these brown bags a while back about the water chemistry in the pond, and also just highlight how great this brown bag series is, because that led to a few events where we now have a graduate student working with us to sort of identify some of the strange chemistry that we see in the fish pond. And that actually all bloomed out of introductions that I made following that last brown bag. So that was really great. But for those who weren't there for that, we had just this extreme stratification before, just like about 4 or 5 years ago. And this like real big nutrient sink to the bottom of the pond, this anoxic zone, the bottom like 4 to 6 feet of the pond. We increased the flow through the alveoli over the past year, and then also deployed a solar powered little upwelling dock. So this thing has a couple solar panels, a battery, and a little 12-volt pump, and it just sort of bubbles from the bottom to try and sort of hasten the destratification of the pond. And so of all these efforts and the whole restoration of the pond, we can really measure the benefit in the stratification and the oxygen levels throughout the pond. 2018, we had this like 6-foot layer of just zero oxygen towards the bottom. By 2022, that was shrunk to like 3 feet, but still the bottom 6 feet really had very low levels of oxygen at about 2.0. Now, as of measured about a month ago, the only oxygen deprived zone in the whole pond is now at just like the bottom foot, essentially in the mud. And then it really goes up to like levels that could sustain most life pretty rapidly, even at like 22 feet deep, and then very well saturated oxygen from 16 or 17 feet through the surface. So the oxygen rich zones of the pond has really dramatically increased over the past few years. And so on that point, I just want to kind of touch on, we talk about production in fish ponds and restoration of fish ponds, and really just to hammer down that these two things don't need to be black and white separated entities. Like focusing on production and focusing on restoration, these two things can really happen together harmoniously. Since 2019, all the mangrove has been removed from around the fish pond. We have a much increased flow from our alveoli. We work with a local nonprofit that organizes monthly community work days every second Sunday of the month, and it's a really great opportunity for the community to get involved and come down. Those are all focused just on the restoration of the pond, not on the business model or production. So if anyone watching is interested when they're on Kauai, please reach out. We're certainly happy to share the sign up. But again, these two things, the production and restoration, really don't need to happen next to each other, like are apart from each other. Fish ponds really can be in a state of production during the restoration, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So just some last thoughts that I had and points I'd like to make. We really enjoyed a lot of support on academic, government, and industry level. Kauai County has a really great grant program that's only available to local businesses or local nonprofits, and it offers small grants. It's really benefited a lot of small farm producers on Kauai. I think that could be replicated throughout the state very easily and very efficiently, and that's a great model. The community has a lot of input on who gets their awards, so it really is a good community-based program. We've also enjoyed funding through federal levels from NOAA, Pacific State Marine Fishery Commission. We have a great relationship with Hawaii Sea Grant, with PACRAC at UH Hilo. So I think there's no doubt that a lot of people in the aquaculture industry and surrounding groups really do have a lot of interest in promoting fish pond production and getting fish ponds back, because it's such an opportunity just to increase the sustainable production in the state for all seafood. And I think funders really have a large appetite right now for ideas that can help to increase the actual production in fish ponds, especially with sort of less conventional ideas. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for the industry to partner. I'm not saying just with us, but with all fish ponds throughout the state. And there's a lot of need to sort of incentivize these partnerships, and which in turn incentivizes production. So I would just really encourage researchers who are working in that area or interested in working in the area of coming up with solutions to help out fish ponds reach new levels of production, to really include funding and think about funding for the actual fish ponds themselves in the form of, especially in the form of salaries for technicians, sort of helping everybody benefit from these funds, especially federal funds coming into the state. So the fish ponds are directly getting benefit outside of just the animals they're growing. I think that'll go a long way for helping to incentivize production. Kua Aina Ulu Awamo is a great nonprofit that has connections with fish pond operators throughout the whole state. They're really great if you have an idea that is intended to benefit fish ponds, to get their opinion, and then also to have introductions with the operators that and the practitioners around the state that would be the best fit for your project. They have a really great idea of the whole landscape of fish pond restoration. I certainly don't speak for the fish pond community. I'm just speaking on what we're doing and sharing our experiences. And I think that there really is an industry benefit from these sort of projects. A lot of people have interest in fish ponds right now and being involved. Not a lot of people are going to be finding careers in fish ponds, but when you have restoration of fish ponds that are incorporating aquaculture activities too, is a really great opportunity for training and just introduction to aquaculture more broadly as a career path. We've had a number of interns and senior projects for high schools that come down. And, how many of these talks do we talk about like the need to expand and develop the workforce in Hawaii? I don't need to tell this group that, managers don't really want to be hiring outside of Hawaii to fill management positions, but it's just there's a lack of the trained personnel here. So, finding people when they're young and involving them in aquaculture specific fish pond projects is just a really great way to introduce people to these career options and get sort of on the ground training. Not every fish pond is going to have a hatchery, but there's lots of opportunities for training along the way. So thank you all for taking the time to listen and enjoy a little conversation.
All right. Mahalo, Dave. Wow, there's a lot going on at Kauai Sea Farm. Wonderful. And so glad to hear that, your first talk resulted in some collaborations to help with your water quality. And yeah, it's just a wonderful thing. Okay, let's open it up. Who has questions or comments for Dave? Go ahead, Jim.
Good job, Dave. Very interesting project. Larval rearing is probably your biggest challenge, I imagine, if you want to reproduce those animals, especially those sea cucumbers. Vibrio is, typical problem marine hatchery. I wanted to ask, are you washing the eggs after spawning? Because that's a way you can introduce Vibrio into the LR system if the eggs come in contaminated. That would be something to consider. And then,
yeah, we are washing them. Our main issue is that prior to the ozone, like having a hatchery at a fish pond is a great in theory, but in practice it's pretty challenging. Our issue was that our reservoir water was testing high for all kinds of Vibrio colonies. So we do wash the eggs very well, but if we're washing them with water that has Vibrio in it, it's not really going to, only is going to go so far. So that's where the ozone is really coming in. As the next stage of tackling this issue. And it's interesting with our clam production, for whatever reason, our clam hatchery success is we're very happy with it considering, you know, the facilities and the water and everything that we're working with. But just seems like the sea cucumber larvae are especially susceptible to these bacterial infections.
Yeah, I've had a lot of interaction with, obviously shrimp, but also shellfish hatcheries. And there just seems to be a lower water quality requirement for some reason. In the biology of the shellfish larvae, those folks get away with a lot less, cleaning of the water, the technology. And so what works in clams, it doesn't necessarily going to work in sea cucumber, which is probably a much more difficult larval rearing process. So I applaud what you said. Ozone, I think that's a good way to go. And probiotics, absolutely get those in there from the get-go. I got so hooked on probiotics in larval rearing that we started putting it in the algae and spawning tank and everywhere. And
Yeah, that's a good, that's an
suppress
interesting
those.
idea. Yeah, putting in the algae, it probably helps like prebiotic too, get it in their gut.
Exactly. So I got more and more further into it and used it in everything and saw benefit. So
Excellent, thank you.
Think
It's
about that.
encouraging.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jim. Other questions or comments? Steve?
Hi, Dave. Good talk, good overview. I hope I can visit your facility next time on Kauai. I have a question regarding the oysters. You said you didn't know which species they were. Are you having trouble identifying the species, or do you know if it's the same species being used in Pearl Harbor or what they're raising in Kualoa?
I know that it is not the same as any of those species. It's really difficult to like identify an oyster by looking at it because there's huge, like the morphology is like hugely different. But we had oyster seed from that same species that's being grown in Pearl Harbor and at Kualoa. I don't know if Kualoa is doing the native ones anymore, but they grew, but it was like very, very, like over the period of a year in the fish pond, they grew from about the size of a dime to about the size of a nickel. And so very, very, very slow. And this species seems to be much more rapid growing. The inside of the shells also a lot different. Look, it has a different appearance. So, at UH Hilo, they've been identifying like all of these oyster species that nobody knew were in Hawaii. So it's possibly one of those or just one that hasn't been recognized as being here yet.
Okay, understood. Well, I applaud your efforts, especially for the multi-trophic approach, using the cucumbers and the oysters and everything else you're trying to integrate in terms of restoration and just, maximizing the natural opportunities you have. But I do agree, and I think focusing on high value products like the sea cucumbers and oysters is going to be a good way to maximize your efforts.
Yeah.
Because marine biology is cool, but as I was told many years ago, you need to focus on a high value commodity to be successful. And that was probably the best advice I got in the late 80s from somebody who went to UCLA and got their marine biology degree. Anyway, thank you for your talk, and good job.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
Hey, Dave. Eric Franklin from University of Hawaii. Really enjoy the talk. I also would love to visit the facility and check out what you have going on. But question is, what are your barriers for ramping up production, and especially from a technological angle? I know you talked about technicians and salaries, but are there any other kind of bottlenecks that you've identified that really could benefit from having either engineering expertise, biotechnology expertise, anything along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, the stuff I went over was pretty broad. Like for us specifically, the clam production is the main, that's the main. Clams and Ogo are the products that are in the stage of being ramped up at the moment. And it's really just getting the seed supply from the hatchery. You know, our hatchery is really, we're producing seed and we just need to be producing more and more and more. That's you know, ideally in like an ideal scenario for a farm, like there's a reason that farms don't have hatcheries. Like usually in the industry you have a hatchery that gets really good at producing a whole lot of seed, and then the farms that are good at growing it, not like a farm with a hatchery to produce just enough seed to grow in their facility. That's why we had a lot of trouble with the non-native oysters for tons of reasons. But yeah, if there were a hatchery supply, and even with sea cucumbers, like if there was a hatchery supply that didn't need to be like our hatchery, but that comes into a whole, you need the demand from the farm to produce it. Like it turns into a whole infrastructure. But that's how most areas of high production in aquaculture end up, you know, attaining those values. Is you have enough demand from farmers that you can just have a hatchery that gets really, really, really good at growing this stuff. And in Hawaii, we just don't have the industry on like, and we definitely have the industry on the hatchery technology, but not like enough demand of farmers to grow it to make it viable.
So, I mean, it sounds like, is it hatchery scale that is a bottleneck? Or, I mean, if you were to ramp up your hatchery to get more seed, you'd be able to then have better grow out.
Yeah, for us, the hatchery scale, and it would really just come down to really labor, you know, just having to justify the labor to really expand the hatchery. You know, we're in the process of expanding the hatchery. It's just like a slow, you know, it all comes down to funding. We don't have we're not working off of a like a very high budget type of project. We're really just, so we put our hatchery together based on the needs that we had. And we're producing a pretty fair amount of seed for what we have. We're, you know, increasing that amount, but yeah, it really comes down to money, like most of the time.
Okay, thanks.
Great questions. Thank you. Anyone else have questions or comments for Dave? Alex? Alex, you're on mute.
Thanks. Sorry, this is Alex Leonard from NOHA. I'm just curious, Dave, for the sea urchins, is the plan to let them roam around the pond free, untethered?
No. So one of the reasons that we have is basically like the species that we've targeted now as the one that we're really focusing on, because we started the project, part of the project was to figure out what species. So we had like these different species in Hawaii with these different levels of value, both either locally or in export markets. And so the one that we've really narrowed down the focus on is not the most valuable, but it is high value. It has value even in local markets. We've had chefs reach out asking to buy them from us just from reading about our project. And they're nocturnal, so they come out and feed during the night, and then during the day they go and look for a habitat. So the way that the farms grow them in China, or a similar species is grown in China, they have these old shrimp ponds, and then they put these habitat structures out in them. And so the habitat structure is just like a layer of corrugated roofing, and they all the animals during the day go and hide in there because they're looking for shelter. So the way that we would grow this species that we're proposing would be to cage off an area of the pond and then just have it full of these little habitat structures. So then during the night they come out and they graze in their contained area, and then during the day you can go and monitor them just by lifting up the habitats.
And then for harvest, you would just go and pick them up by hand.
Yeah, so that species, I mean, like you can pick up one of these, like we have these little habitats that we made with PVC pipe and corrugated roofing, and they're like 1 foot by 1 foot. And you know, in an area of sea cucumbers, like in our tank, you can go it's a sand bottom tank. You can go and pick it up and there'll be a dozen sea cucumbers just like all piled on top of each other in there. Another species we worked with, so we've tested some other cage designs for other sea cucumber species, and that one also that worked pretty well. But the idea, we're trying to come up with ways that will be pretty palatable to other fish ponds as well, and just having the idea of like less stuff out in the pond, less visible cages and things like that, is probably the best way to get more buy-in from other producers. Because similarly, if the sea cucumber thing were to work out, long term, it would really require volume that would be not just at our facility. We would, the idea would be something like there could be a central hatchery that could produce sea cucumbers for other fish ponds, and then we can come up with ways to grow them and then harvest and process them as a more of a shared project or product.
Great, thank you for that answer.
All right, thanks for the question and comments, Alex. Anyone else have a question or comment for Dave?
I'll
Go
chime
ahead,
in real
Brenda.
fast, just since Dave gave a shout out. Yeah,
Hey,
Dave,
Brenda.
that was an awesome presentation. It's always cool to hear what you guys are working on. And I think your perception of kind of the scale thing for funding and your hatchery, I think that's like spot on. You guys are I think at the forefront of a site building out your capacity and testing the waters for production. And there are all these local coming up behind that will be able to increase the need that you're seeing, would help to kind of justify central hatchery kind of like models or frameworks, or ways that folks can work on multiple species and get at the right scale and kind of contribute to the like putting funds together and just collaborate in that way for production. So I just wanted to let you know that I think your read on that is really spot on.
Yeah, hello, Brenda. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, Brenda. Jim, did you have another question?
Yeah, thanks. Dave, what are you going to do with those moi? Let them go in the pond or net pens?
No.
What's your idea?
That's cage production. Yeah, so we have a right now they're in a tank until they get a little bit bigger. Very happy that they're surviving and growing very well in the tank over the past 3 weeks. And then once they get to be, I think probably somewhere in like, they're about 9 grams now. And they're getting pretty close to being the size that we could put in. We made a cage of just like PVC coated wire mesh. And we used one of our 10-foot diameter tanks as sort of a jig, and like wrapped it around that, and then made a bottom to it. And then it just has a float. So it's a floating cage that is already out in the pond that we're planning to stock them in, then grow them out in.
Nice. Cool.
Yeah, we're excited.
All right, great. Other questions? If no one has any other questions, Dave, I just wanted to ask you, how many students or interns can you accommodate like per year? And do you have particular relationships with Kauai Community College and the high school nearest you?
So we tried very hard to work with Kauai Community College for a few years, and that was a lot of dead ends. And then last year we started trying to work more with high schools, and that's been a very good experience. We have now mainly 2 high schools that we offer our facilities as potential for their senior projects. One of the people that did their senior project last spring is now a full-time intern through the Kupu program. We're partnered in STEMworks program, which is like a female-based summer program internship for high school students. And so for the number of people, it really, like, the STEMworks thing is like a 6-week internship, and then our Kupu program, that's a full year internship. We have a limited staff, so we can't take a ton of interns all at one time, but we have good capacity for a large number throughout the year for sure. Probably as far as full-time interns right now, we're kind of once one intern, if they're there for a year, gets trained up, then we could take a second one. But there's definitely like you sort of lose the benefit as the number goes up.
Yeah, thank you. My colleague Annie Rosa had to hop off, but she led the writing of a workforce development grant that was awarded from NOAA. So you all will be hearing more about that in the coming months. But are there any final questions or comments for Dave? All right. Well, thank you, Dave. That was really such a wonderful talk, and I hope it spurs more collaboration. If anyone out there has some ideas for Dave, please reach out to him. And we look forward to hearing more about your great work there, Dave. And thanks everyone for joining, and see you next month, but really hope to see you next week at the Senate informational briefing on January 28th at 8:30 a.m. You can come to the state capitol for that, or you can join via the Senate YouTube channel. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Aloha.
Thank you.